Look at Microsoft. They're claiming that they're trying to merge them in Windows 8. They're lying. They're not. They're full of shit.
From an OS perspective, they just suck.
In 2001, one man looked at the most powerful tech company on the planet and said, "They're coming for everything we've built, and when they finally take it, you won't even know it's gone." Nobody believed him. 23 years later, every single warning he gave is playing out in real time. On your computer, in your operating system, inside the tools you use every single day. His name is Linus Torvalds. He created Linux. And this video is going to show you exactly how he predicted Microsoft's master plan before the rest of the tech world even knew there was a plan. By the end of this, the way you see your computer and who actually controls it will never be the same. Here's something most people don't know about Microsoft's history, and it's the key to understanding everything that comes after. Before Linux was ever on their radar, Microsoft had already perfected a strategy for dealing with threats. They didn't call it anything official, but observers in the industry eventually gave it a name: Embrace, Extend, Extinguish. The idea is simple. When a competing technology gets popular enough to matter, you don't attack it head on. That creates bad press and rallies the community against you. Instead, you embrace it. You say you love it, you build compatibility with it, you make it easy for people to use your version of it. Then you extend it. You add features, you make your version slightly better, slightly more convenient, slightly more integrated with everything else people already use. Nothing dramatic, just better enough. And then, once people depend on your version, once the original starts feeling like the outdated one, you extinguish it. You let it fade, not by killing it, just by making it irrelevant. Microsoft ran this play on Java in the late 90s. They ran it on internet standards. They ran it on document formats. Every time, the pattern was the same. By the time the target realized what was happening, the game was already over. Linus had watched all of it. He wasn't guessing about Microsoft's intentions. He was pattern matching against a documented history. And in 2001, when Microsoft officially labeled Linux a threat in internal strategy documents, documents that got leaked and became known as the Halloween documents, he recognized exactly which phase was coming next. The question wasn't if, it was when. Fast forward to 2014. New CEO Satya Nadella. And almost overnight, Microsoft's tone completely changes. Suddenly, they love open source. They're contributing to the Linux kernel. They're running Linux on Azure. They show up to developer conferences with shirts that literally say, "Microsoft loves Linux." In 2016, they released the Windows subsystem for Linux, letting developers run Linux directly inside Windows. The tech world loses its mind. Then, in 2018, Microsoft buys GitHub for $7.5 billion. GitHub, the largest platform for open source development in the world, now owned by the company that once called that same community a cancer. The narrative writes itself. Microsoft has changed. The wars are over. Linus was wrong. Where was Linus? Quiet, mostly. But when pushed, he said something everyone immediately dismissed, that Microsoft had done this before, that they play nice, integrate, make themselves essential, and then, when nobody's paying attention, they flip the script. They said he was paranoid, stuck in the past. But here's what matters. He never said Microsoft couldn't change. He said they wouldn't. And that difference is everything, because one is about capability and the other is about intent. By 2020, something quiet starts happening with Windows. Features that were once optional become mandatory. Telemetry, the data Windows collects about everything you do, ramps up, and you can no longer fully disable it, even in professional editions that people pay extra for specifically to get more control. Windows 11 launches in 2021 with requirements nobody asked for: TPM chip, secure boot, and a Microsoft account just to install the OS on a computer you own. No local user setup without workarounds. Workarounds Microsoft actively closes with every update. The official reason? Security. But developers noticed something else. Every update made Windows slightly harder to use independently. OneDrive became harder to remove. Edge kept reinstalling itself. Default app settings reset after updates, undoing your choices. Linus had said exactly this would happen. Once a corporation controls the platform, they control the behavior, and users won't realize it until it's too late. The mainstream press kept writing feel-good stories about the new Microsoft, but something far bigger was coming, and it started with a tool called Copilot. Here's a direct question. If millions of developers freely share their code under open source licenses built on the idea that the work stays open, what happens when a corporation takes all of it, feeds it into a closed AI, and sells access as a subscription? That's not hypothetical. That's GitHub Copilot. In 2021, Microsoft launched an AI coding assistant trained on billions of lines of code that developers had uploaded to GitHub under open source licenses. The AI itself? Proprietary. Sold monthly. Microsoft was taking the open source community's collective work, running it through a black box, and charging for the output, without giving anything meaningful back. Developers were furious. Legal challenges followed. Microsoft's response: the code was publicly available. This is fair use. Legally, complicated. Ethically, the clearest signal yet that Microsoft loves open source was branding, not philosophy. But that was just the warm-up. Because in 2024, they almost shipped something that made Copilot look minor, and they almost did it without asking anyone. Microsoft announced a Windows feature called Recall, the pitch. Your computer screenshots everything you do, runs it through AI, and lets you search your entire history. Forgot something from 3 weeks ago? Just ask. Sounds useful, right? Security researchers looked under the hood and found that all of that data, every screenshot of everything you'd ever done, was stored in an unencrypted database. No password, no protection. Passwords, banking details, private messages, medical searches, plain text, accessible to anyone who touched your machine. And Microsoft had been planning to turn this on by default. The backlash was immediate. They pulled it back. Promised a fix, promised opt-in. But the point isn't what happened after the backlash. The point is what they tried to ship. A feature that silently records your entire digital life and stores it unprotected. And the default was on. Linus spent 30 years saying you cannot trust a corporation with that level of access to your system, because once they have it, they will use it. Here was Microsoft proving in 2024 that the concern was never paranoia. The media called it a stumble, but it wasn't a stumble. It was a window into the direction they're heading. And what's coming next is even harder to reverse. Here's the picture most coverage misses entirely. Microsoft isn't really building Windows anymore. Windows is the vehicle. What they're actually building is the infrastructure layer for AI. And in tech, infrastructure means control. $13 billion invested into OpenAI, AI embedded into Office, Windows, Edge, Bing, and Azure. Every one of those tools requires your data to flow through Microsoft's servers to work. Your documents, emails, searches, conversations, all of it. And in 2024, they push Windows 365, a version of Windows that runs entirely on Microsoft's cloud. You don't install it, you don't own it. You rent it. Everything you do lives on their machines, not yours. Linus predicted this exact scenario. He said the goal was never to defeat open source directly. It was to make open source irrelevant by controlling the layer above it. You can still run Linux. Nobody's taking that away. But if the AI layer, the cloud layer, and the productivity layer all belong to Microsoft, then the operating system underneath barely matters. They don't need to beat Linux. They just need to make it irrelevant. And based on what's actively happening right now, that plan is further along than most people are willing to admit. In early 2025, reports began surfacing about something Microsoft is actively exploring: kernel-level AI integration in Windows. If you're not a developer, let me explain what that means in plain terms. Your operating system has layers. The stuff you see, your desktop, your apps, your files, that's the top layer. Underneath all of that is the kernel. The kernel is the core. It's the part of the OS that talks directly to your hardware. It controls everything. Right now, AI features in Windows are applications. They're programs that run on top of the operating system. You can uninstall them. You can disable them. They're optional. Kernel-level AI integration means the AI isn't an app anymore. It's baked into the foundation of the operating system itself. It's not something you install. It's not something you can remove. It's there, the same way the file system is there, the same way memory management is there. If that happens, there is no opting out. There is no, I'll just disable that. You either accept it completely or you stop using Windows entirely. Linus built Linux on one central idea: the user should be in control of their own machine. Every major design decision in Linux reflects that philosophy. Microsoft is building the opposite. An operating system that looks like it gives you control, that has settings menus and preference panels and all the visual language of user choice, but where the meaningful decisions are made for you by AI at a level you can't access or modify. And the most unsettling part of all of this? Most people still don't see it. They see convenience. They see features. They see smart tools that make their lives easier. Linus saw the end game. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. If Linus kept saying these things, and they kept turning out to be correct, why did nobody listen? The answer is that Microsoft is genuinely exceptional at one specific thing. They never make sudden moves. They don't announce their end game. They don't show you the destination. They take one small step at a time, always framed as a benefit to you, always accompanied by a press release about how much they care about your security or your productivity or your experience. They said they loved open source, and they meant it, as long as open source stayed small enough and fragmented enough not to threaten their core business. The moment it became a real alternative at scale, the strategy changed. Not loudly, not with a press release, just quietly, consistently, one update at a time. Linus understood this because he'd watched the same movie play out multiple times. Netscape, Java, every technology that got close enough to matter got either acquired, marginalized, or wrapped in Microsoft's ecosystem until it effectively became a Microsoft product. Linux was different because it was built in a way that made direct acquisition impossible. You can't buy the Linux kernel. You can't buy the GPL license. The code is free by definition and structure, not by goodwill. So Microsoft had to try something different. They had to make Linux irrelevant rather than dead. And here we are. Let's be honest before we close. Linus Torvalds is not a saint. He's famously blunt, difficult, and has had public falling outs with developers and communities over the years. He's an imperfect messenger, but on this specific question, whether Microsoft's embrace of open source was a genuine shift or a long-term strategy, he has been consistently, demonstrably correct. And the reason isn't that he hates corporations, it's that he understood something fundamental. A corporation's purpose is to maximize value for its shareholders. That's not cynicism. It's structure. Open source is wonderful for Microsoft when it builds their user base, trains developers on their tools, and seeds their ecosystem. It becomes a problem the moment it threatens their revenue or their control. The Microsoft that called Linux a cancer and the Microsoft that posted "We love Linux" on billboards are not two companies at two different moments of moral evolution. They are the same company at two different phases of the same strategy. Embrace what you can't destroy, Integrate until you're essential, then shift control upward to the cloud, to AI, to the infrastructure layer above the OS, until the OS itself no longer matters, and neither does your choice of it. We are in that phase right now. This doesn't mean you should stop using Windows. Microsoft makes genuinely useful products, and for many people, the trade-offs make sense. But stop being surprised. Stop calling it an oversight when telemetry can't be disabled. Stop calling it a stumble when they try to deploy an unencrypted surveillance feature by default. Stop calling it a coincidence when free features become subscriptions. These are not accidents. They are decisions. Linus warned us in 2001. He warned us when they bought GitHub. He warned us when WSL launched. He said it clearly, repeatedly, and people called him paranoid every single time. And then, one by one, everything he said would happen, happened. The only question worth asking now is whether we keep waiting for the next convenient feature and call it progress, or whether we start paying attention to who owns the infrastructure we depend on and what they actually intend to do with it. Because if history has taught us one thing about Microsoft, it's this: they don't fail to change. They change in ways that always, eventually benefit them. And the moment you mistake their strategy for generosity is the moment you stop protecting yourself. Linus saw it. He said it. He built the alternative. The question was never whether he was right, and here's what makes this story uncomfortable to close. Microsoft is not the only company running this exact playbook right now. There's another giant doing something nearly identical with the infrastructure that powers the modern web. And they've been even more effective at making sure nobody talks about it. That one's next.